Some places feel wrong long before anything frightening actually happens, and on dreadful visions, the stories that stay with people the longest are often the ones that begin in complete silence. The most unsettling mysteries are never about what suddenly appears in the darkness, but about what has been there the entire time, waiting to be noticed. Story 1. The family across the lake never came outside. 26-year-old Ethan Carter rented the cabin during the first week of October, hoping to spend a quiet vacation away from Minneapolis before starting a demanding new job later that month. The property sat on the northern edge of Pine Hollow Lake in rural Minnesota, surrounded by dense forests that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The nearest grocery store was 20 miles away. Phone service came and went without warning, and after sunset the entire area fell into a kind of silence that most city residents never truly experience. To Ethan, that sounded perfect. He wanted a week without traffic, deadlines, or people. The cabin itself was beautiful in an old-fashioned way. Dark cedar walls, a stone fireplace, a wooden dock extending into the still water, and enormous windows overlooking the lake. Across the shoreline, perhaps 300 yards away, another cabin stood partially hidden among tall pine trees. It appeared larger than his rental, with a wide porch facing the water and warm yellow lights glowing behind the curtains. During his first evening there, Ethan noticed movement inside. A family of 4 occupied the place. A man and woman sat at a dining table, while 2 younger children moved around the living room. The sight was oddly comforting. Even in the middle of nowhere, other people were nearby. The first 2 days passed peacefully. Ethan spent his mornings fishing, his afternoons hiking nearby trails, and his evenings reading beside the fireplace. Every night, however, he noticed the same thing. Around 6:30, the family gathered at their dining table. Around 7, the children sat in front of what looked like a television. Around 8:30, the parents remained in the living room while the kids disappeared upstairs. The routine repeated with almost perfect consistency. At first, Ethan found it charming. By the 4th night, he found it strange. On Wednesday evening, heavy rain rolled across the lake. The weather service warned residents to avoid unnecessary travel, and strong winds bent the surrounding trees for hours. Ethan remained indoors, drinking coffee near the window. Across the water, the lights inside the neighboring cabin never flickered once. The family continued eating dinner exactly on schedule. The children watched television exactly as before. Nobody closed curtains. Nobody stepped outside to secure furniture or check the weather. It was as though the storm simply didn't exist. The following morning, Ethan walked down to the shoreline expecting to see evidence of activity. Tire tracks, footprints, a boat tied to their dock, something. Instead, the opposite property looked untouched. No vehicle sat in the driveway. No smoke emerged from the chimney. The dock remained completely empty. He shrugged it off. Maybe they'd arrived before him. Maybe they planned to stay for weeks. Still, an uncomfortable question began forming in the back of his mind. How had they gotten there? That evening, he tested a simple theory. At precisely 6 o'clock, he sat on his porch with binoculars. The cabin across the lake remained dark and silent. No movement whatsoever. Then, almost unbelievably, every light inside switched on at exactly 6:30. Not gradually, not room by room, all at once. Seconds later, the family appeared. The father carried plates to the table. The mother sat beside him. The 2 children entered from somewhere deeper inside the house. Ethan lowered the binoculars. He couldn't explain why, but a chill moved through him, because he was certain the cabin had been empty less than a minute earlier. The following day, he drove into town for supplies. Pine Hollow consisted of little more than a gas station, a bait shop, and a diner attached to an aging motel. While purchasing fishing equipment, Ethan casually mentioned the family across the lake. The reaction surprised him. The elderly woman behind the counter stopped smiling. A younger employee quietly walked into the back room. Even the 2 men drinking coffee near the window glanced toward one another without speaking. Trying to ease the awkward silence, Ethan laughed and explained that he kept seeing the parents and their kids every evening from his porch. The woman stared at him for several seconds. Then she asked a simple question. "You staying in the old Rasmussen cabin?" Ethan nodded. Her expression changed completely. She set the fishing lures aside and lowered her voice. "And you've been seeing people across the water every night?" For the first time all week, genuine unease settled in Ethan's stomach. He confirmed that he had a mother, a father, 2 children. The old woman looked away toward the windows. Nobody else in the store said a word. Finally, an older man sitting alone near the coffee machine slowly stood and walked closer. He wore a faded hunting jacket and carried the tired expression of someone who had spent his entire life in the same small town. He studied Ethan carefully before speaking. "Son, you mean the Harrison family?" Ethan smiled awkwardly. "I guess so. I never introduced myself." The old man's face remained completely serious. "The Harrisons haven't lived on that lake in 12 years. The Harrisons haven't lived on that lake in 12 years. The words settled over the room like a sudden drop in temperature. Ethan waited for somebody to laugh. Nobody did. The old man introduced himself as Walter Jensen, a lifelong resident of Pine Hollow. He explained that the Harrison family had owned the cabin across the lake for nearly 2 decades. Thomas and Emily Harrison raised their 2 children there every summer, and according to everyone in town, they were good people who kept mostly to themselves. Then, one October night in 2012, their cabin caught fire. The blaze spread quickly through the dry wooden structure. By the time firefighters arrived from the neighboring county, the entire building had already collapsed. Nobody made it out. Walter spoke calmly, almost mechanically, as though he had repeated the story too many times over the years. Ethan interrupted him. "That can't be right. I've seen them every night since I arrived." Walter didn't argue. Instead, he asked something that made Ethan's skin crawl. "Do they always eat dinner around 6:30? Ethan nodded. "And do the children watch television afterward?" Another nod. The old man sighed. "Same as always." The silence that followed felt unbearable. Before leaving, Walter gave Ethan one piece of advice. He told him that curiosity had a way of making people do foolish things around Pine Hollow Lake, and if he valued a peaceful vacation, he should keep his curtains closed after dark and ignore whatever happened across the water. Naturally, Ethan did the exact opposite. That evening, he positioned himself on the dock with his binoculars long before sunset. At 6:25, the cabin remained completely dark. No movement, no lights, nothing. At exactly 6:30, every window illuminated simultaneously. The family appeared. The father carried dishes to the table. The mother sat in her usual chair. The children laughed at something invisible beyond Ethan's hearing. Everything unfolded exactly as it had every previous night. Except this time, Ethan noticed something new. Nobody blinked. He watched for nearly 20 minutes. Not once did any member of the family break their gaze, rub their eyes, or shift naturally in their seats. Their movements resembled rehearsed actions performed countless times before. A routine, perfectly repeated. Long after midnight, Ethan remained awake. The lights across the lake still glowed. Unable to ignore his curiosity any longer, he made a decision that would haunt him for years. The following night, he borrowed an old canoe from behind his rental cabin. The water was perfectly still. Clouds covered the moon. By 10 p.m., he pushed away from the dock and began paddling toward the opposite shore. The journey took only minutes. Yet with every stroke, the warmth from the Harrison cabin seemed increasingly unnatural. The yellow lights shining through the windows felt frozen in time, like a memory refusing to fade. When Ethan reached the dock, his heart nearly stopped. The wood had collapsed years ago. Rock covered every board. The structure leaned into the water, half consumed by moss and weeds. Nobody had maintained this property in a very long time. Climbing ashore, he approached the cabin itself. Walter had told the truth. The building was destroyed. Blackened timber, broken windows, sections of the roof entirely missing. Nature had already begun reclaiming everything. And yet, warm light still spilled from the dining room window. Ethan slowly moved closer. The interior looked untouched. Thomas Harrison sat at the table. Emily smiled softly beside him. Their two children remained exactly where Ethan had seen them every night. Dinner plates rested before them. The television glowed in the corner. It looked completely normal, completely alive. Then the youngest child turned her head. Slowly, deliberately, she looked directly through the window, at Ethan. Within seconds, the rest of the family followed. The father, the mother, the older son, all four pairs of eyes fixed on him. Nobody stood. Nobody spoke. They simply stared. The expressions on their faces weren't angry. They weren't frightening. They looked relieved, as though they had been waiting for someone to finally come visit. Panic overtook him. Ethan stumbled backward toward the canoe. The moment his foot touched the shoreline, every light inside the cabin went out. Complete darkness swallowed the property. He paddled across the lake faster than he ever thought possible. By sunrise, he had already packed his belongings. Before leaving Pine Hollow for good, he stopped once more at Walter's house. The old man listened carefully. Then he disappeared into another room and returned with an old newspaper clipping. The photograph showed the Harrison family standing outside their cabin during the summer of 2012. The father, the mother, two children, the exact same clothing Ethan had seen them wearing every night across the lake. Walter quietly admitted that others had reported seeing lights in the cabin over the years, especially during October. Most ignored them. A few investigated. None ever stayed at Pine Hollow again. To this day, the ruins still remain on the northern shore of the lake. Fishermen avoid the area after sunset. Locals rarely mention the Harrisons. But on certain autumn evenings, when the water becomes perfectly still, warm yellow lights can sometimes be seen shining through windows that no longer exist. And if someone watches long enough, they may notice something even stranger. The family never leaves the house. Not once. Not ever. As though they are trapped within the final ordinary evening they ever shared together, endlessly repeating a life that ended 12 years ago. If this story unsettled you, let me know what you would have done in Ethan's position, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales from Dreadful Visions. Until next time, keep the lights on, keep your curtains closed, and remember one thing above all else. Sleep well tonight, if you can.